Tonight, our guest is Lisa Graves, and she's the founder and executive director of True North Research, a national investigative watchdog group that works with journalists and other researchers to shine a bright light on the dark money fueling regressive agendas targeting vital institutions in our republic, such as our courts and public schools. Graves is one of the nation's foremost experts in exposing how special interests distort public policy and try to thwart the public's interest in a thriving and inclusive democracy and to impede measures to protect our environment and mitigate climate change. She has such an extensive bio. Her investigations have been featured in Ava DuVernay's Oscar-nominated documentary, The 13th, and in Showtime's Years of Living Dangerously, and in a PBS documentary narrated by Bill Moyers entitled The United States of Alec. She has many, many more accolades, and her work has been really everywhere. But she has earned her JD cum laude from Cornell Law School, where she was a managing editor of the Cornell Law Review, and a BS with highest honors in political science from the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, where she was an award-winning college debater. And I will let her fill you in on all of the rest. Welcome, Lisa. I'm going to spotlight you.
I am so excited to see you all. Thank you so much for taking time out of your Wednesday evening for this discussion about Project 2025. And I just want to thank Katie Paris and Julie Womack and Julie Collins and the team here who's helping tonight with this webinar. And just thank you all for your time. And also the amazing schedule that you set forth there. There's so much, Julie, that you all have planned to help keep things on track in terms of people understanding and being motivated. Before I jump in, I just wanted to say it's interesting to hear about the efforts to have the Rally Your Squad, because one of the things that I do in my work is track what the right wing is doing, and we see them promoting this thing called Trump Force 47, which in which they are giving the names of 10 neighbors to their volunteers to get them to turn out to vote. So just FYI, that's going on. But there's so much more I want to talk with you about. And I just wanted to, I guess I should go and share my slides so that we can get started here. So I founded True North Research, and I'm also the managing director of Court Accountability. And part of my background is that I was Deputy Assistant Attorney General at the Justice Department in the transition between Bill Clinton and George W. Bush. And so when I was there as the deputy of the Office of Legal Policy for the orderly transition of government, after inauguration on January 20th, 2001, the very next week, a bunch of guys came into the Justice Department. They were the political appointees of George W. Bush. And they were working at that point in 2001 to implement the 2001 version of this Heritage Foundation. It was Project 2001, basically. And so I saw firsthand what they were doing, that that many of them had come in with this agenda scripted out by the Heritage Foundation, and they were determined to basically regress the law then. Now, I can tell you from having looked at what the Heritage Foundation's proposals were in 1981, in 2001, in 2017, through this one is even more radical, more reactionary, more extreme. It's hard to believe, but in fact it is. And it's also the case that when the 2017 version of this was being pushed forward by the people around Donald Trump, the Heritage Foundation boasted to its members, its donors, that nearly 2/3 of its agenda had been implemented within the first 18 months. So in 2018, the Heritage Foundation was basically bragging that it had succeeded in implementing more than half of the plans that it had proposed. Of course, Trump was not paying that close attention in terms of himself, but he had brought so many people into his administration to implement it. So let me get started on what I want to share today before we get into the questions and answers. So many of you already know what Project 2025 is. But it is a plan to execute a set of drastic, feasible, specific plans that would institutionalize Trumpism. Those aren't my words. Those are the words of the people who are promoting this plan. It's, as you know, more than 900 pages. It includes, part of the effort includes a database of people who they think they can trust to implement these extreme provisions, up to 50,000 people. That would include displacing tens of thousands of federal workers who are experts and replacing them with, operatives, basically. And they also have a training center. There was recent video published about that training center and how they're planning to implement it. And that's not all. There's also the first 180-day plan that they have not made public. In fact, they've sort of boasted about the parts that they have a part that people don't know what it is. And so it is something that is a real threat. It is something that is very detailed, and it's something where they are planning to have the people in place to implement this. Now, let me pause for a second and just tell you something that many people do not know, which is that in 2000, Jenny Thomas, the spouse of Clarence Thomas, who's a sitting Supreme Court justice, she was working at the Heritage Foundation in 2000. She was literally the person helping to screen people for the Bush administration, this same sort of personnel recruitment policy. Clarence Thomas did not recuse himself in Bush v. Gore. It was a 5-4 decision. He participated in that decision. The next thing that happened is that Jenny Thomas was promoted to be the liaison from the Heritage Foundation to the Bush White House. And she then became the highest paid non-board member of the Heritage Foundation. In the next 7.5 years that Jenny Thomas worked at the Heritage Foundation, she received nearly $1 million in total salary and compensation directly as a result of her husband participating in that illegitimate decision in Bush v. Gore in 2000, in the year 2000. And that's the precursor of this plan. It's a similar playbook, but this is kind of on steroids. But just, that's what she was doing. And now there were reports, press accounts, and other leaks from within the Trump White House during 2017, 2018, 2019, that Jenny Thomas, even though she wasn't working with the Heritage Foundation, was actively trying to screen people out of White House jobs and screen in the people that she thought, basically satisfied her agenda. And as we all know from reporting, subsequently, Jenny Thomas was instrumentally involved in encouraging Mark Meadows to set aside the 2020 election and get her people in the room with Donald Trump, including Sidney Powell and others, to advance this outrageous, outlandish insurrection plan that, basically was the precursor for the violence on January 6th. So this Project 2025 is the newest version of that plan that Jenny Thomas was working on back in 2000, that she was helping implement in her own way during the Trump administration. And it is a serious threat to our freedoms for the reasons we're going to talk about. So who is working on this and what are they doing? Well, abortion is a key target of this plan. So this plan includes a chapter written by a guy named Roger Severino. Roger Severino was in the HHS, the Health and Human Services Department of the Trump administration. He wrote, along with some other people, this particular chapter. And this chapter is designed to basically not pursue the rhetoric that we've heard. The rhetoric we've heard from some is that the Supreme Court just gave the issue of abortion back to the states. We know that's not what happened. We know they reversed Roe versus Wade. We know that Sam Alito and Clarence Thomas, took an axe to our the liberty rights that were articulated in Roe, that women have a right to liberty, to control our destiny, and to make decisions about our reproductive future. And also in that opinion, Clarence Thomas suggested that they might reverse Griswold versus Connecticut, the constitutional right to access contraception. But not just that. This idea that they are going to send the issue back to the states is belied by Project 2025, because what it does is it sets up a way for the federal government in another Trump administration, in the installation of Trumpism, which they call the next, quote, conservative administration, that they would basically use federal power to dramatically revise American women's rights. So regardless of where you live, if you're in a state that has banned abortion or nearly banned abortion or functionally banned it by banning it at 6 weeks, which is about when most people just first learn that they're pregnant, let alone have access to abortion medicine, this plan would basically make it harder everywhere in the country, regardless of what state you live in. So for example, one of the things that it would do would be to change the rules or at least implement an ancient rule called the Comstock Act to use federal criminal authority to bar the shipment of abortion medication, to make it illegal to ship, to transport, to order, to receive abortion medicine, which is the most common method of abortion in America, and a safe method of abortion, proven in study after study after study. Also, before that would happen, or as they're in the process of trying to push that through, they would basically, this new administration implementing this plan would require that any state that receives Medicaid funding comply with demands about reporting pregnancies and miscarriages and abortions. And so does that mean monitoring the periods of every single woman? Not necessarily, but what it means is monitoring the pregnancies of many women as they can get into their monitoring process. And the penalty for a state is if they're not complying with the demands of the executive branch, or on other issues like immigration, that they could withhold funding from those states, from hospitals and from the states in terms of providing access to healthcare. So it's a very potent weapon that they're pursuing. There's more to this that I'll talk to you about, I think, during the Q&A, but it's suffices to say that while there's rhetoric by some right-wing women's groups, for example, the Independent Women's Forum, who over these last several years has tried to say, don't talk about abortion, talk about other things, it's not at risk. Or groups like Susan B. Anthony Fund, which has been instrumental in pushing these abortion bans from the moment of conception to basically try to downplay this issue in these crucial months this year. But the fact is that that is their longstanding agenda, to ban abortion nationwide without exception. And as you know, some of you live in states where they've not just banned abortion effectively in terms of the time for accessing abortion, but they also have, many of these states have no exception for rape or incest, for rape by a family member. And many of them do not have any exception for the health of a mother. And if they have an exception for saving someone's life, for example, with Idaho, the Idaho statute, in essence, requires you to be at the brink of death. So, they have a process where they can turn women away who are bleeding. We've seen that in Georgia. We've seen that reported in recent weeks, what's been happening in different places where people are not yet dying, but they are in the brink. They're not on the brink of death. And so they're forced to go home and possibly suffer miscarriage, sepsis, lose their ability to have children in the future, just devastating consequences. This is a direct result of the agenda of Roger Severino, who, by the way, is the spouse of Carrie Severino. Carrie Severino, you may not have heard of, but she actually leads one of the major groups that is part of Leonard Leo's network. I'm sure you've heard of Leonard Leo. He's the guy who Trump chose to choose the people he chose from for the US Supreme Court. Carrie Severino leads this thing called Judicial Crisis Network, has led it for a number of years in close consultation with Leo. So so Leonard Leo's sort of right-hand person in his court capture operation, her spouse is the person who wrote this chapter. And we know that Leonard Leo has played an instrumental role in putting all 6 of the justices that are in that majority in Dobbs in place. He started his career working to get Clarence Thomas on the court, helped get Roberts and Alito on the court, was instrumental in getting Gorsuch and Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett on the court. And so, these connections aren't conspiracy theory, they're reality. It shows how this network, where Leonard Leo himself is aggressively anti-choice, anti-abortion, is trying to basically impose his personal will through these appointments and through the people that he has in place to help push these things, like Roger Severino, who wrote this chapter. Okay, we'll move on quickly to other parts of this agenda. So one of the things that the Project 2025 would do would be to constitutionalize fetal personhood. What does that mean? That means giving a fetus or giving a fertilized egg equal rights to women, in essence. So a person who's born in the United States under the Constitution, under the 14th Amendment, the 14th Amendment says that people who are born in the United States receive the privileges and immunities of citizenship in America. This would basically set the clock to the moment of conception. And we know that there are some justices on this US Supreme Court who have already signaled that they support that approach. As I mentioned, there would be surveillance of pregnancy outcomes. There would be the revocation of the FDA approval of abortion medicine. There would be specifically efforts targeting Planned Parenthood to defund reproductive health care providers, provide substantial number of the of the health tests, the cancer screening every single year for millions and millions of Americans, as well as helping people get access to contraception and treat STDs. And there would also be an effort specifically to abandon comprehensive sexual education, pregnancy prevention, and other information in schools. And on page 485, the Project 2025 is so extreme that it directs, this is Roger Severino and his group, that directs that if in a woman's preventative health pamphlet, it can't say condoms because it says women don't use condoms. Now, obviously, condoms are important for protecting against pregnancy, but also protecting against disease. And these people are so extreme, they would bar federally funded programs that involve women's preventative health from even mentioning the word condoms. Pretty extreme, very extreme. So, Trump and his allies, including those behind Project 2025, are working to limit access to birth control, ban medication abortion, and enact a nationwide abortion ban with or without Congress. And they are counting on the courts to back them up. And they do have a whole host of Leonard Leo appointees, people who are part of this sort of MAGA judiciary that has happened under Trump, including not just the Supreme Court, but lower court judges. And one of them, there's a new article out tonight on Mother Jones about the Fifth Circuit. One of those judges that Donald Trump put in place, someone who is part of the Federal Society that Leonard Leo has helped lead for years, a judge named James Ho, argued in one of the opinions that he wrote that an OBGYN has a cognizable legal interest in seeing a pregnancy to term, that doctor's interest basically outweighs a woman's interest in being able to terminate a pregnancy. These are extremists. Okay, moving on. As I said, part of this plan is not just to implement this through executive order, but also to rely on the courts to advance this agenda with or without a congressional majority. But there are things that a congressional majority could do. Democratic majority, for example, progressive majority could do to try to restore the rights that were destroyed in the Dobbs decision and help protect our access to reproductive health care, including access to abortion. So at this point, we know that the U.S. Supreme Court is not a backstop for our rights. We saw that in the decisions in Dobbs. We saw that in the decisions about climate change. We saw that in this past few months with the decisions giving a president unprecedented and reckless immunity from prosecution for criminal acts. So what does that mean? That means that we, the people, have to basically defend our rights. How do we defend our rights? We defend our rights by talking about these freedoms that are under assault. We defend our rights by helping to encourage other people to register to vote and to vote to protect our freedoms. And one of my friends has said that, really the most important thing from a organizing standpoint is to make sure that in the turnout, in the effort to get people registered and get out to vote, that an election is too big to rig by the court or anyone else. So we have resources for you. We'll get you the slide deck after this webinar, but there are a number of resources, including Project 2025 admin, as well as a brand new site that just launched this past week called Project 2025 WTF. That's a separate project with an allied group and with court accountability action. And I know I spoke quickly. I wanted to get in that first 20 minutes and really get the material out there that we had initially talked about with Julie.
I actually jotted down one that wasn't on our list that we talked about, that clearly this is a long game plan. This has been being planned for decades.
Yes. So the Heritage Foundation was created in 1973 by a guy named Paul Weyrich. He got money from the Coors Beer fortune to back this, along with money from another super billionaire, son of a billionaire, basically, a guy named Dick Scaife. And the Heritage Foundation was created in the 1970s in order to advance a sort of a right-wing, proto-Christian nationalist agenda. And the reason we know that, this isn't just speculation, is that in, I think it was 1981, Paul Weyrich, the founder of the Heritage Foundation, was giving a speech at an evangelical church in which he literally said that he didn't want more people to vote. He said he didn't want these goo-goo groups, good government groups, to be out there registering people to vote. He said, because when more people vote, the power of the people in that room, these evangelical right-wingers, not all evangelicals are right-wing, but in that particular instance, they were and are, when more people vote, their power goes down. And you can see a through line from 1981 forward with this effort to make it harder for Americans to vote. Now, it was largely constrained by the Voting Rights Act, which, as we know, was the product of decades of blood, sweat, and tears, people sacrificing their lives to advance the Voting Rights Act to ensure that Americans have voting rights. But John Roberts, who was confirmed to the U.S. Supreme Court with the help of Leonard Leo in 2005, one of the targets that John Roberts has had since he was a lawyer in the Reagan administration was the Voting Rights Act. And so in 2013, after the United States Congress, on a bipartisan basis, with only a few members dissenting, so more than 500 members of Congress supported reauthorizing the Voting Rights Act for another 25 years based on detailed findings about the ongoing threat to Americans' right to vote and the need to make sure that there are pre-clearance provisions for these states that have a history of making it harder for people to vote. John Roberts intervened and set aside crucial enforcement provisions of the Voting Rights Act in order to enact, as a judge, his personal ambition and agenda to weaken the Voting Rights Act. So this is a long-term fight. And that's one of the reasons why it's not just these conversations we're having right now and that we'll be having in the next several weeks. This is a long-term struggle to restore our rights, to restore our freedoms. And our opponents have had strategic patience in order to roll back our rights. I don't think it's going to take us as long to get back those rights as it took them to take them away. I believe there are tipping points. And as we've seen from so many people coming out to vote in Kansas in 2022, in Ohio, in Wisconsin, in other states, we know that people understand what's at stake, and we're not going to take our freedoms being stripped from us.
Ooh, okay, well, let's get into this. It just seems to me like they have taken a page from the 50s from when we actually got those, Brown v. Board and all that, with the way they dismantled Plessy. So this is what they're paying us back, it seems. So Trump claims to not know about Project 2025, and he has made references to Agenda 47. So I know you talked about it briefly in your slide deck, but what's the truth here and how it's best to respond when people say, oh, he's not for that. He's Agenda 47. That's completely different.
Well, first of all, I think that so the part of the work that I do, the work that I've been doing, investigating the right for many years now, is I look to what they do and what they say and not what they spin. So anyone can come back with a comment and say, the sky isn't blue or whatever, that it's not raining. Whatever the statement is, like I'm referencing, of course, the don't piss on my shoes and tell me it's raining sort of thing. But, basically what I do in my work is look at what they actually said, what they actually did. And in this instance, as has been widely circulated, there is a major speech that Donald Trump gave. He actually flew on a jet with Kevin Roberts, who's the leader of the Heritage Foundation. He appeared in an event with, a heritage background and talked about what they were going to do. And he specifically said that they, meaning the Heritage Foundation, are going to lay the groundwork and detail plans for exactly what our movement will do when the American people give us a colossal mandate. That was the Heritage Foundation's dinner keynote address by Donald Trump in April of 2022. People can make their own judgment about what to believe that a person says, and particular person in particular. But What he said when he was speaking directly to the Heritage Foundation is, you all are going to make the plan that we're going to implement.
Mhm.
And then the other, can I just add, so the other part that happened is that we learned that J.D. Vance, who everyone knows his name now, had written the foreword to a book by Kevin Roberts, the head of the Heritage Foundation, praising the book. The book is about Project 2025, and the initial cover of that book, basically was how to burn down Washington, and it had a match on it. I'll send the exact image of the book. Subsequently, they substituted in a new so that was the first cover, had the match on it. And then they had to take back America by burning down Washington. And then they substituted in without the match. And then ultimately, after the story came out about this book and about Vance's role in writing a foreword to this book about Project 2025, the publisher decided to hold publication of the book until after the election. Now, that's the book that Kevin Thomas was basically pre-promoting when he said that we're going to have a bloodless revolution if the left lets us. They have posited this as almost a quasi-civil war, and that this book is the blueprint for their agenda to basically rewrite our rights and our freedoms. And their rhetoric has a violent, component to it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we've seen that. So you kind of talked about this, but you haven't like flat out said it. So a lot of people will say, oh, you're just being hyperbolic, that, he wouldn't really implement this plan. Now, you said you watch what they do, not what they say, but, what do you say when somebody says, oh, they're not going to really do this?
Well, if you look at the immigration issue, for example, what you see is what you see on the coverage, on the political coverage of the campaign, are statements about deporting more than 10 million immigrants. And what you see in Project 2025 is a plan to basically change the rules to allow to suspend the rules, these administrative procedural rules about conditions of detention. Mm-hmm. So one of the things they want to do is they want to immediately suspend a consent decree around the detention of immigrant children. So that there's a rule in place that provides protections for children from being separated from their parents in a way that they're lost and they're never reunited, along with other things. It's called the Flores consent decree. Project 2025 would immediately dispense with that consent decree, basically wipe it off the books. Project 2025 would then change the rules for detention to allow, and I'm sorry to say this out loud, it's so disturbing, but basically to allow the creation of these sort of tent cities for holding mass numbers of immigrants that they would seize. It also, has a component, and there we have some material on this that we can get you aside from the PowerPoint, in which we've gone through and looked at how they would implement this in terms of deploying military or National Guard or other law enforcement in order to seize mass numbers of people, in particular in cities, in blue cities, in essence, where they claim that the cities are not cooperating with them. It would also allow the federal government to attack district attorneys that don't cooperate with them. It is a very far-reaching plan. And not only would it be completely disruptive of people's lives, but also it would absolutely disrupt our economy. It would disrupt our supply chains. It would disrupt our agricultural production in the United States. And when you look at some of the statements that Trump and others have made, they've basically said that they do not believe in the 14th Amendment's birthright citizenship. That's the clause I mentioned earlier, that a person born in the United States is a citizen. So you would have citizens and immigrants swept up and no real procedures in place to sort out who's who, but you would have this creation of these massive tent cities. It is appalling and astonishing, and the overlap between the rhetoric that we've seen reported from Trump or Vance or their proxies and the proposals that are in Project 2025, they fit together. And the people who are involved in Project 2025 are some of the very same people who would be tapped to implement these extreme policies, like Stephen Miller, who's tried to distance himself from Project 2025, but was involved in creating the conditions for this in the Trump administration and beyond. So we have a particular 2-page card on immigration that we'll get to you, that people can share. It's easy to print out. We have this on, I think, 20 or 25 different topic areas, including specifically how the Project 2025 would work, how in some ways it's already been implemented, and who would be implementing it.
Okay. Well, you talked a little bit about pregnancy registries and tracking periods. So is that something that they really are definitely doing? Is that what Project 2025 is actually calling for?
Well, Project 2025 calls for there to be basically mandatory cooperation by states with demands from the federal government for information about pregnancies, miscarriages, and abortions. So the language is about being able to track pregnancies, miscarriages, and abortions. Does that, like I said, does that mean actually tracking everyone's period in the country? No, but what it means is people who are going to see doctors or medical professionals or people to advise them who are basically reporting a pregnancy by showing up, that data, that information about them could be required to be sent to the federal government. And it's not just a request. The way the Project 2025 works is that it would punish a state that did not cooperate by borrowing money for all of the state in terms of money to reimburse Medicaid, Medicare, and other federal government programs.
So what impact will Project 2025 have on education?
It would have a devastating impact on public schools in America. First of all, it calls for the elimination of the U.S. Department of Education. This is a clear, unambiguous demand. It also would change the rules for kids with disabilities in terms of changing that particular statute. It would expressly eliminate the Head Start program, which helps millions of kids get access to nutritious breakfasts and other nutritional support when they're going to school, when their family, being raised in impoverished circumstances. Literally targets Head Start in particular. And then it would change in some ways what kids are taught too in other arenas.
So what about the impact on Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid, or any other assistance for families that need social services? And you just talked about kids with special needs in school. So what about some of those other programs? How does it impact that?
So Project 2025 expressly targets major changes for Medicare and Medicaid, and in particular would basically push seniors into the less desirable component of Medicare, basically a pathway toward privatizing Medicare. And we have, again, a special card on that we can get you that you can share with people who you love, who would be affected by these changes. Social Security is also, it would be changed in terms of like Social Security as we know it would be changed by Project 2025. But we think that part of that attack on Project 2025, part of that attack on Social Security is part of that 180-day plan that they're not detailing. We believe that because many of the people who have been instrumental in trying to privatize Social Security have either funded or supported or are part of the team, in essence, that would be going in to implement this agenda. And as I mentioned at the outset, Project 2025, as extreme as it is not the entire package. We know that they bragged about, and they were caught on tape bragging about, the Heritage Foundation was caught on tape bragging about the executive orders and other things that they would have as part of the 180-day plan.
So what does privatizing Social Security do? What does that mean? That folks will get like less benefit, less people will actually be able to access it? What does that mean?
Well, so there are a number of proposals, some of them are, there's a range of them. Some of them would be possibly as a temporary measure to increase the retirement age, so make it harder to get access to Social Security benefits earlier. Some of it would be to change basically change the rules in terms of even having entry into the Social Security program. So there's been a long-term agenda I think I first heard about this about a decade ago, about how people like Charles Koch, one of the richest billionaires in America and the world in the 1970s, was targeting Social Security and saying it was going to go bankrupt. We saw that rhetoric again in the 80s. We gotta privatize Social Security. It's going to go bankrupt. 90s, gotta privatize Social Security. Like, it is the thing that these right-wing billionaires, there's another billionaire named Pete Peterson who had a whole program attacking Social Security. What they want is they want to get in essence, forever fees. And let me just unpack that for a moment. What we've seen with these privatization schemes is not just Social Security, it's a lot of other programs. What's happening is that there are very wealthy people who want to basically take something that's a public service or a public good. And my friend Donald Cohen in the Public Interest has written about this extensively, but they want to take something as a public good and they want to privatize it, which means either the money is transferred to the private sector to administer, or it's only provided by the private sector. And when that happens, when it's transferred from the public money to the private sector, what that means is that people are getting fees. Basically, they're taking money out of your Social Security in order to, manage your investments. So it's a way to basically put more money into the financial sector and take it out of your pocket. That's part of what that does. And the other part of that is really disturbing is the roots of this sort of right-wing movement, both on the U.S. Supreme Court and beyond, is really in reaction, as you mentioned, Julie, really in reaction to Brown versus Board of Education, which was finally that the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution was read to mean what it says. People are entitled to equal protection of the law, and we cannot have racially mandated segregation in America. So immediately after that decision the next year, this economist named Milton Friedman said the problem wasn't segregated schools, the problem was government schools. And what we should just have is privatized schools where people could go to Black schools, white schools, or mixed schools, in the words of Milton Friedman, who was a founding sort of figure for many of these right-wingers. So they have been wanting to kill public schools now going on 70 years or more. Yeah. And so, this privatization scheme that I mentioned on Social Security, it's also targeting schools, public schools, and more.
So that impacts the next question. So how is this Project 2025 going to impact communities of color and the LGBTQ plus communities?
Well, part of Project 2025 has already been enabled by this U.S. Supreme Court in targeting affirmative action efforts to redress structural racism. So we just had a decision in this past year where the U.S. Supreme Court has intervened to stop colleges from trying to, have a program to really take into account the wide diversity of Americans and Americans' cultural backgrounds and racial backgrounds and experiences, and to bar programs that recognize race in America, in essence. And so part of what Project 2025 would do, along with some of the people who have been instrumental in it, is continue to attack diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives to bar those expressly, basically everywhere and anywhere, including in programs that have longstanding programs like minority business support, possibly women's business support, and more. And so there is a sustained attack on that, as well as an attack on the accurate teaching of history, which we've seen in state after state, like Florida and other places, where they don't want people to learn about Martin Luther King. They don't want people to learn about Rosa Parks being, asked to sit in the back of the bus. They want to stop that and claim that that is somehow hurting the feelings of the grandchildren of the people, I guess, who might have been involved in that, rather than actually just telling our history truthfully. So there's definitely a substantial component of Project 2025 that would harm communities of color and harm, not just harm the present communities of color in our society, but basically also pursue this sort of anti-Brown attack through immigration, pursue policies that basically make it harder for people to understand American history from all races.
So what about plans for military veterans? Someone asked about military pay and benefits. How does Project 2025 impact veterans and military?
Yes. Project 2025 also would affect veterans. And let me actually just grab the page there, because I want to make sure that I have it exactly right. Hold on a second here. Actually, I'll grab it. It's on a different tab. While I'm grabbing that tab, let me just say on the other part of diversity in terms of LGBTQ rights, Project 2025, really is an express attack on people, LGBTQ Americans, and their ability to have marriage equality, to marry the person you love. It also would have an impact on how adoption works, and the notion that marriage and family is can only be with a man and a woman, even goes into the Project 2025 description of IVF technology, basically saying that you can't have two mothers and a father in terms of the IVF effort to have mitochondrial DNA to help address a genetic inherited disease. And so they even try to translate this idea that somehow American law requires, even in IVF, for there to be only one mother and one father to have to have that kind of fertilization. Hold on, let me just grab that now. I have it right here in front of me.
Well, and I want to put a pin in that because somebody had a question in the chat that I want to come back to.
Okay.
Once you answer this question.
Okay. Let me grab it. Oh, I closed the tab. Okay. I promised to get you the card on veterans. We have a card on, but I've closed it and I don't want to delay our opportunity to talk about some of the other issues, but it is also harmed. Veterans' interests are also harmed. And I know, for example, that one of the things that they want to do, that they pledge to do, is to eliminate the Whistleblower Protection Office of the Department of Veterans Affairs, which we know has been instrumental, although not entirely effective, but at least is a mechanism for veterans reporting terrible conditions at some of the VA hospitals, or mistreatment or lack of access to mental health care support for veterans. Like, the idea that they want to get rid of whistleblower protection office just shows how corrupt and venal and just bent this Project 2025 agenda is.
Well, someone put in the chat, they asked the question, and I think I know partially the answer. If we have HIPAA, then how are they going to have access to these pregnancy records and things? Now, maybe I'm wrong on this, but it was my understanding that part of HIPAA was based on Roe v. Wade. Is that true? Is that part of it, the privacy piece of the
well, so that privacy protection provisions in HIPAA aren't, like, they weren't created because of Roe, but they definitely have an effect of protecting women's privacy, people's privacy in accessing healthcare involving their reproductive freedoms. The thing that's hard to get my mind around, is sort of all bets are off. We have this whole rubric of rules, and we have a posse, in essence, in place with this Project 2025 agenda, where their very purpose is to basically get rid of any rules they don't like, to suspend them, have the president disregard them. And J.D. Vance, for example, has quoted a quote, basically, sorry to be redundant, but he basically has said, if the U.S. Supreme Court were to rule against them, he dares them, like, if that were to happen, he dares them to actually enforce it. Like, so they are operating with a level of arrogance that they aren't bound by the rules that the rest of us think are the rule of law. Rules like private health, privacy, protection from the government knowing about your reproductive history or your pregnancy history. All those rules, basically everything is dispensable in pursuit of their extreme agenda to impose their own religious beliefs on Americans as binding law, and to use the power of government to do so. And so when we think about, so there would be litigation, right? So let's say they made that requirement, you have to turn over information about pregnancies. Someone objects and says, I can't do it under HIPAA. That case gets litigated up to this Supreme Court, and they're basically counting on the court letting them do what they want, and if they don't, doing it anyway.
Wow. Well, as we know, the state of Florida is getting hit yet again with another hurricane. And it is my understanding that they want to get rid of NOAA, NOAA, in Project 2025. So what will happen with these storms? Somebody actually asked, they said the climate emergency is happening right now in real time. With GOTV, how do we protect these voters, from being able to get out and vote when, they're literally, fighting for their lives right at this moment?
Yeah, I mean, what's happening between Hurricane Elaine and the current hurricane that is barreling toward Florida just underscores how important it is that we have actually devoted and effective administrators, experts in place at these agencies, that they're not displaced by political operatives and tools. I'm sure everyone remembers Sharpiegate,
Yeah.
where when Trump was president, he basically lied about the course of a hurricane and then like drew on a map that it was going toward Alabama when it was never going there. You cannot have that be the official policy of the United States government. But what Project 2025 would do would be, first of all, it would remove NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Agency, from the location. It's like a science-based location, to put it under sort of military control. So within the command structure directly of the president directing it, which means how do you rely on what is being said by that agency that we all count on to give us accurate information about the course of storms and the causes of storms, like the devastating climate changes that are underway that we're seeing manifest in these hurricanes. But also, one of the provisions in Project 2025 would be to move FEMA out of the Department of Homeland Security and into the Department of Transportation. So there's just all sorts of mischief that they're up to basically try to change who's in charge, who gets rich, who gets the contract. Like, it has downstream effects that are not focused on actually making sure that Americans get access to support. So as we watch the devastation that's hitting our fellow Americans across the South, from the mountains of North Carolina to the Gulf of Florida, the people need real leaders who are going to step up and provide help and offer real solutions. But, we're seeing certain politicians spread lies about the damage to our climate that makes these storms do so much more destruction. And worse yet, they're peddling disinformation about the federal aid that is actually underway, going out to help people in harm's way. And I think we need real leaders. Americans need real and responsible leaders who are going to fully fund FEMA, not vote against it, not only directed to the people who vote for them, but who are going to address the needs of the American people and deliver the help to people who need it. And I think we have to vote to make sure that remains the rule, and that we don't have a sort of policy, which we saw manifested before, where there's a threat that you're not going to get aid if you didn't vote for a particular politician. That is not the American way. That is a path of destruction and patronage, and it's actually heartless, because every American has a right to have access to the emergency support that we need from our federal government and state governments, and it shouldn't depend on whether you're Democratic, Republican, Independent, or didn't vote at all. Everyone as a human being should get that sort of opportunity to get services, to get the support we need when we face a disaster.
So does Project 2025 give the executive branch more extensive powers? So can he just do executive action after executive action after executive action and just implement this plan, and there's nothing to stop him?
Well, in essence, they've already threatened to do that. There were conversations that were happening in 2020 by Jeffrey Clark and others about invoking the Insurrection Act, basically allowing a president to declare martial law and suspend the ordinary civil rules if people are protesting against that person, or otherwise engaged in what they were described as an insurrection, which is somehow not what they say happened on January 6th, and said that was tourists. But, for the purposes of this right-wing infrastructure, there is this notion that a president should be able to deploy those powers and to use emergency powers in order to change the rules, to not follow ordinary rules of procedure. And we've heard, some of the politicians involved talk about being a dictator on day one, or, for a day, or whatever that means, or even having some sort of purge games where people, can act violently with impunity. And again, that's not America. That's not who America is. That's not who we aspire to be. But what we now have, unfortunately, with this U.S. Supreme Court, this Roberts Court, these MAGA justices, you have a court that has given blessing to a president issuing orders as supposed official acts. And if it's an official act, it can't be a crime. I think it really, it's such a dangerous and reckless decision. And it's also the case that we just saw some articles this week from the right where they're talking about how if a so-called conservative president wins, they could place another 2 justices on the Supreme Court. That this election is about, the court is on the ballot in this election, and they would like to have one president appoint a full majority and a beyond super majority of the Supreme Court for generations to come, not just the next year or 5 years or 10 years, but 20 or 30 years. And so it's vitally important that people understand that we have to reform the Supreme Court. We have to make sure that this court doesn't go further to the right. And that in fact, we adopt significant and important reforms to restore the integrity of the court and deal with the corruption that has been widely reported by impeccable reporting by investigative reporters.
Yeah.
But we have a card too on executive power that we can get to that has the citations that shows you which provisions they could invoke or that have been threatened to be invoked, and why these issues matter, why it isn't just hysteria. It's their own plan. I can't believe they put it in writing in such detail, far more detail than in 1981, far more detail than the version I saw in 2001 that has been published, far more detail than even in 2017. This is a mammoth. I think it's a big mistake on their part, but fortunately people understand and are getting how extreme this is. And when people hear and learn more about Project 2025, they don't like it, and rightly so. It is a terrible, destructive, regressive, repressive agenda that we cannot allow to be implemented in America.
Well, and I think that people should also recognize that if they're that bold, how much worse it'll probably even be than what we're even probably discussing right now, because they're going to just do things with impunity. If JD Vance is saying to the Supreme Court, make me, that just means that whatever they think of, they're probably going to do.
Well, when shortly after the 2016 election, I spoke with NPR and they were asking me about the rule of law, given my work in all 3 branches of the federal government. And I said at the time, and I still believe it, that the rule of law is a slender reed. It depends on having people in public office who support following the rules, who respect those rules and have a desire for real justice and equity and fairness. But if you have people in positions of power who do not respect the rules, who do not think they are binding to them, who think that they have some sort of higher mission to reduce our freedoms or restrict our rights, we cannot sustain the rule of law if it's being assailed by the very people who have those levers of power in their hands. So that's one of the many reasons why it's so important that we talk to our friends and family about what's at stake, what this Project 2025 would mean, how real it is, and how our freedoms are under assault. But also, it doesn't have to be this way. I have a sign at my house. I'm at a hotel right now, but I have a sign at my house that says it doesn't have to be this way. We can choose a different destiny. We can choose not to go down the path of Project 2025. We can choose to resist it no matter what happens in November, because these people behind Project 2025 want to impose their regressive, repressive views on the rest of us. And we need to unite because we represent a majority of people who want to have our freedoms respected, who want to have our kids and our grandkids and our nieces and nephews grow up in a society that's more free, not less free. And so we have a moral obligation to continue to resist this in whatever form, whether it's from an executive branch or whether it's from outside the executive branch, continuing to lie and spread disinformation like the kinds of lies we've seen about FEMA, about the disasters going on in the southern states right now.
Well, that's a good segue. We're right at time. I think, is there anything else that you want to share with us before we let everybody go?
I just want to say, part of the challenge is to not let these sorts of this information defeat you, but have it really be fuel for understanding what's at stake and why it's so vital that we exert every effort we can to help protect and defend, our democracy, but not just our democracy as a form of government, but our freedoms and our future. And so for me, I actually feel despite the fact that I live in these work, all the time, I'm looking at what the Heritage Foundation is doing or what Project 2025 is manifesting, or, JD Vance's forewords and things like that to books. I actually feel a tremendous, amazing hope because the American people care about this. We get it. The more people hear about it, the more they want to do something about it. And we've seen such an outpouring of action by ordinary Americans standing up for our freedoms, for our libraries, for our future, for our ability to control our destiny, for our ability to marry the person we love. I feel like our trajectory is not this path, but we can't take it for granted. We have to do everything we can to help bring as many people with us to move forward into a much brighter and better future, the future that we aspire to and that we deserve as Americans to have, to be free, to be respected, to be treated with respect, to have equality be a real thing, not just something written on a piece of paper, and to really address the crises we face in our environment and disasters and more, and to do it together, united, and not divided by someone who does not have that vision for America, for the United States of America.
Well, thank you so very much for sharing with us tonight. I can't even believe this time went so fast. And I'm sure that we could have asked another 15 questions. But thank you. You've really broken things down and made it easy to understand and reinforced again the fact that folks need to rally their squad. They need to get their, friends and family to the polls. And we've got to fight this with everything that we've got and continue to fight even beyond November 5th.